Donald Trump is weakening a military alliance while telling the public he is making America safer. But the material in front of us describes South Korea responding not with panic, but with a message that it is increasingly prepared to defend the Korean Peninsula on its own. That matters because an alliance is not measured by how loudly a president praises it. It is measured by whether the other country still believes the guarantee behind it. And the evidence here forces a specific question. Is Washington creating leverage for peace or teaching one of its most important Asian allies that American protection can no longer be treated as dependable? Start with the statement attributed to South Korean President Lee. He says he carefully reviewed Trump's recent social media messages and photographs. That detail sounds polite, but look at the sequence described in the source. Trump publicly criticized joint United States-South Korea military exercises, argued they were inappropriate and hostile in light of his relationship with Kim Jong-un, and moved to reduce exercises that were already underway. The South Korean president's response, according to the material, did not begin with a private diplomatic announcement or a joint military statement. It began by acknowledging the president's social media messages. That is the first important fact because the method matters almost as much as the policy. An alliance built around deterrence depends on coordination, predictability, and the belief that both sides understand what the other is about to do. If a major shift is first understood through public posts, uncertainty becomes part of the policy itself. The source interprets Lee's language as mockery. We cannot establish tone that confidently from the text alone. What we can establish from the material is more consequential. Lee answered Trump's reduction of exercises by emphasizing South Korea's own capacity to shoulder responsibility for its defense. So the first payoff is this: the material does not establish that South Korea has formally abandoned the alliance. It does show a South Korean president publicly embracing greater self-reliance at the same moment Trump is reducing a visible symbol of combined deterrence. Those are not the same thing as a breakup. But they are exactly the conditions under which an ally begins asking what it can safely do without you. Now look at Lee's second move. He does not attack Trump in the language the source's commentator uses. He does something more disciplined. He says he respects efforts to create conditions for dialogue and hopes reduced exercises can contribute to a stable peace regime. In other words, the strongest reasonable defense of Trump's decision is right there in the South Korean response. Fewer exercises could lower tensions and create space for diplomacy with North Korea. That defense deserves to be taken seriously. Military exercises can send deterrent signals, but they can also be perceived as threatening by an adversary. A government trying to reopen dialogue may decide that scaling them back is worth the trade-off. Lee's statement, as presented, explicitly connects the reduction to trust building and renewed talks. So, it would be careless to claim that every reduction in exercises is automatically a surrender or that South Korea itself rejects the move. But that defense creates a harder test. If the purpose is coordinated diplomacy, then what is the diplomatic process? Who agreed to what? What reciprocal action is North Korea taking? And what evidence shows that reducing exercises produces a durable concession rather than a one-sided reduction in readiness? The source gives us a striking answer on one part of that question. It says Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's sister and a senior North Korean figure, stated that she was unaware of recent communication between Kim Jong-un and Trump. That directly conflicts with the source's description of Trump presenting himself as communicating with North Korea and emphasizing his relationship with Kim. We should be precise. The material does not provide independent documentation proving either side's account. But if the North Korean statement is accurately represented, then the public narrative of active personal diplomacy is under real pressure. Still, timing has strategic meaning. When Washington creates uncertainty about its own military commitments, Beijing does not need South Korea to become a Chinese ally to benefit. China only needs Seoul to become more cautious about automatically aligning with Washington. The source says Wang Yi urged South Korea to remain neutral between Beijing and Washington and called for renewed North-South dialogue and stronger economic ties. If accurately represented, that is not subtle. Beijing is offering a competing frame: reduce dependence on Washington, stabilize relations closer to home, and deepen regional economic connections. That is the exact credibility risk this story exposes. Don't get played. The evidence discipline for American politics is a ready to use system for separating a documented statement from the conclusion attached to it, so your convictions are harder to discredit when the next political narrative arrives. It applies beyond this controversy to clips, polls, filings, statistics, and official claims. The complete digital ebook is only $9, one time. Open the description and click the first link now. The same link is in the first pinned comment, because the next piece of evidence raises the stakes from diplomacy to deterrence. That does not mean South Korea has decided to build a nuclear weapon. It does not mean a weapons program has begun. And it certainly does not mean one interview proves the position of the South Korean government. Those distinctions are crucial. But the fact that experienced security figures can plausibly discuss an independent deterrent tells us what alliance uncertainty can produce. Extended deterrence works because an ally believes the nuclear power protecting it would accept extraordinary risk on its behalf. Once that belief weakens, the ally starts calculating what it would need if the promise fails, which should carry more weight: the intention to create space for diplomacy or the predictable deterrence problem if an ally begins doubting the guarantee behind the alliance. That is the real policy argument, and it cannot be answered by personality or party loyalty. The source then places this against warnings from United States military officials. It quotes Lieutenant General Joseph Gerard describing rapidly developing Chinese, Russian, and North Korean capabilities. According to the material, he warned that China has launched 8 Shang-3 class nuclear-powered guided missile submarines since 2022, is developing hypersonic and other long-range strike systems, and that North Korea has flight-tested intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of delivering a nuclear payload to North America. He also described Russia's advanced hypersonic systems and persistent cyber threats. Notice the contradiction in strategic messaging. The source portrays Trump as minimizing the threat posed by North Korea, while an American general is describing North Korean missiles as capable of reaching North America. Those statements can potentially refer to different things. Trump could be talking about political intent, while the general is talking about military capability. Capability is not the same as intent, but national security planning cannot simply ignore capability because a president believes he has a good personal relationship with a foreign leader. Then there is the carrier issue. The source says the USS George Washington is leaving the Pacific for the Middle East, connecting that move to the broader strain created by American commitments elsewhere. It also discusses difficult conditions aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln and alleges shortages and severe logistical problems. Those claims are serious, particularly anything involving the health or welfare of service members, and this source alone is not enough to establish all of them. They would require direct reporting, Navy records, or corroborating testimony before we should repeat the strongest version as fact. But the strategic question does not depend on accepting every allegation. If major naval assets are being pulled toward another theater while Washington simultaneously reduces exercises in Korea, allies and adversaries will read the combined signal. Military power is not infinite. A carrier moved to one region is a carrier unavailable somewhere else during that period. The question is whether the administration has matched its global commitments to the forces, munitions, and logistics available to sustain them. This is where the strongest defense of Trump becomes important again. An administration could argue that burden sharing is exactly the point. South Korea is wealthy, militarily capable, and should assume more responsibility for its own defense. The United States could then concentrate resources on threats that require uniquely American capabilities. In that framing, South Korean self-reliance is not evidence of collapse. It is evidence that the alliance is maturing. But the defense works only if responsibility is transferred deliberately, predictably, and with a shared strategy. Burden sharing is different from uncertainty. A planned transition tells an ally what capabilities it must build, what American support remains, how combined command will work, and what happens in a crisis. An abrupt public announcement that leaves officials interpreting presidential posts creates a different signal. The material before us cannot prove the full internal process, but it gives us enough to see why the distinction matters. China, in particular, does not need to defeat the United States in a direct confrontation to gain strategic room. It benefits whenever regional governments believe they must hedge. Hedging can mean stronger economic ties with Beijing, more neutral diplomatic positions, independent military capabilities, or reluctance to support Washington in a future crisis. None of those outcomes requires a formal alliance switch. They require only enough doubt to change behavior. That is why the South Korean president's reported wording deserves more careful treatment than the source's most dramatic interpretation. The material does not show Lee declaring that the United States is a liability. It does not show South Korea terminating the alliance. It does not show Seoul choosing Beijing. What it does show is Lee welcoming a reduction in exercises, stressing South Korea's ability to shoulder its own defense, and framing peace on the peninsula as a goal Seoul can actively pursue. Those are significant statements without adding claims that are not actually in the quoted language. So what does the evidence in this source actually establish? It establishes that Trump's approach, as described here, combines reduced joint military activity with a strong public emphasis on his relationship with Kim Jong-un. It presents South Korea's president responding by supporting conditions for dialogue while emphasizing greater South Korean defense capacity. It presents a North Korean official disputing the idea of recent leader-level communication. It shows a former South Korean military figure saying uncertainty is intensifying discussion of an independent deterrent. And it places all of that beside American military warnings about growing Chinese, Russian, and North Korean capabilities. What it does not establish is equally important. It does not prove South Korea has ended or decided to end the United States alliance. It does not prove Seoul has chosen China. It does not prove South Korea will build nuclear weapons. It does not independently verify every claim in the source about American weapons inventories, carrier logistics, or the condition of deployed service members, and it does not prove that reducing exercises cannot contribute to diplomacy. The central contradiction therefore survives, but in a more precise form than the source's most heated language. Trump's policy can be defended as an attempt to lower tensions and push a capable ally toward greater burden sharing. Yet the same record presented here contains signs that uncertainty about American commitments may be encouraging strategic hedging and even discussion of independent nuclear deterrence. A peace strategy that increases an ally's fear of abandonment has a problem it cannot solve with presidential chemistry alone. The responsibility sits with the administration making the change. If Washington wants fewer exercises, it needs to explain what replaces the deterrent value those exercises provided. If it wants Seoul to shoulder more of its defense, it needs a coordinated transition rather than ambiguity. If it says personal diplomacy with Pyongyang justifies optimism, it needs enough evidence of an actual diplomatic process to survive a public denial from the other side. And if military resources are being shifted across theaters, Congress and the public need a credible account of how those choices affect readiness. The standard should be simple. Judge the strategy by measurable results, not by the confidence of the people selling it. Are North Korean capabilities constrained? Is diplomacy real and reciprocal? Is South Korean confidence in extended deterrence strengthening or weakening? Are American forces and munitions positioned to meet the commitments Washington still makes? Those answers will tell us whether this is strategic burden sharing or strategic retreat. And another political clip will soon ask you to decide before those answers are available. Someone will choose the frame, remove the inconvenient context, and invite you to lend your certainty to their conclusion. Become the person who isolates the claim and finds what the packaging left out. Don't Get Played is the complete practical method for doing that across clips, polls, court filings, statistics, official statements, and synthetic media. The digital ebook costs only $9 as a one-time payment. Open the description and click the first link now. The same link is in the first pinned comment. A reaction is easy. A conclusion you can defend requires evidence.